Hey everyone, welcome back to Steve's View. Let's start with something that at first glance looks like just another piece of political news. But if you follow it a little deeper, it opens up a much bigger question about the way modern democracies actually function. On March 20th, 2026, Robert Mueller passed away. Not long after, Donald Trump posted a message on Truth Social that many people interpreted as celebratory in tone. The reaction was immediate, intense, and deeply polarized. Some defended the message, others condemned it. And within hours, the conversation had moved far beyond Mueller himself, because what people were really reacting to wasn't just the death of a former FBI director. They were reacting to what he had come to represent. You saw people instantly sorting him into camps: hero or villain, patriot or partisan, defender of the rule of law or agent of a political faction. And that reaction tells us something important. Because Robert Mueller, for most of his career, was not supposed to be any of those things. He was supposed to be something else entirely. A neutral figure, a professional, a person whose authority didn't come from popularity, elections, or ideology, but from the idea that he stood outside of those things. And yet, by the end of his public life, and even in the immediate aftermath of his death, that identity had almost completely collapsed in the eyes of the public. So the real question isn't about Mueller alone. The real question is, why does it feel like modern democracies are increasingly unable to tolerate people like him, people who try to stand in the middle? Why are middlemen, neutral arbiters, or institutional figures no longer trusted, and in many cases, actively attacked from both sides? To understand that, we have to zoom out. Because what's happening here isn't about one person. It's about a structural shift in how politics works in the 21st century. For most of modern democratic history, there was an assumption, almost invisible, but absolutely essential, that certain people and institutions could operate above politics. Not outside of it completely, but at least not fully captured by it. Judges, prosecutors, intelligence officials, civil servants, they weren't elected, and that was the point. The idea was simple. Elected officials represent the will of the people, but they are also driven by incentives, winning elections, pleasing voters, defeating opponents. So you need another layer in the system. People whose job is not to win, but to apply rules. People who are insulated, at least partially, from political pressure. That's where figures like Mueller come in. Their legitimacy doesn't come from the people directly. It comes from process, from procedure, from the belief that if you follow the rules carefully enough, fairly enough, the outcome will be accepted, even by those who don't like it. And for a long time, that mostly worked. Not perfectly, not without controversy. But it worked well enough that when a major investigation happened, or a court made a decision, or an agency issued a finding, there was at least a baseline level of acceptance. People might disagree, but they wouldn't automatically assume the entire system was rigged against them. That baseline is what's breaking down. And once that baseline disappears, the middle becomes a very dangerous place to stand. Here's why. In today's political environment, neutrality is no longer interpreted as neutrality. It's interpreted as betrayal. If you're on one side of the political spectrum, and a supposedly neutral figure produces a result that hurts your side, the instinct is no longer to say, okay, maybe the evidence led there. The instinct is to say, this person was never neutral to begin with. And the same thing happens on the other side. So instead of one group trusting you and the other questioning you, you end up with both groups questioning you, just for different reasons. You're too aggressive for one side, not aggressive enough for the other. Too political, not political enough. Too independent, not accountable enough. It's a no-win position, but that's just the surface layer. The deeper issue is what's driving the shift. One major factor is polarization, and not just disagreement, real structural polarization. In the past, political opponents were still seen, at least in some sense, as legitimate participants in the same system. You could lose an election or lose a policy fight, and still believe that the other side was operating within the same basic rules. Today, that assumption is eroding. More and more people don't just think the other side is wrong, they think the other side is dangerous, illegitimate, a threat to the country itself. And once you believe that, everything changes, because if the stakes are that high, then neutrality starts to look irresponsible. If you genuinely believe the other side is going to destroy the country, then a neutral referee isn't a good thing. It's an obstacle. You don't want someone carefully weighing evidence. You want someone who will act decisively in your favor, and if they don't, you assume they're helping the enemy. That's one pressure pushing the middle out of existence. Another major factor is the transformation of the media environment. There was a time when most people got their information from a relatively small number of sources. Those sources had their own biases, of course, but they still operated within a shared framework of facts. Now, that shared framework is gone. Instead, we have fragmented information ecosystems. Different groups of people are not just interpreting the same facts differently. They are starting from entirely different sets of facts. And within each of those ecosystems, narratives develop that reinforce group identity. In one ecosystem, a figure like Mueller becomes a symbol of integrity. In another, he becomes a symbol of corruption. And because people are mostly exposed to one ecosystem at a time, those narratives become self-reinforcing. You don't just disagree with the other side. You can't even understand how they see the world the way they do. So when a neutral figure acts, the interpretation of that action is already predetermined by the narrative you're inside. Neutrality doesn't stand a chance. Then there's the issue of incentives. Modern political and media systems reward strong, clear, emotionally charged positions. If you're a politician, you gain support by energizing your base, not by appealing to the middle. If you're a media figure, you gain attention by taking a stance, not by carefully balancing competing arguments. If you're a content creator, even on platforms like YouTube, the algorithm tends to favor content that is engaging, provocative, and aligned with a specific audience. Moderation, nuance, and procedural thinking are harder to package, harder to sell, harder to spread. So the entire ecosystem gradually shifts toward more extreme, more polarized, more emotionally satisfying narratives. And in that environment, the middle doesn't just lose influence, it loses visibility. People stop seeing it altogether. Finally, there's a deeper psychological element. Humans are not naturally wired to trust abstract systems. We trust people. We trust groups. We trust identities. When things feel stable, it's easier to extend that trust to institutions to believe that a system can be fair, even if the individuals within it are imperfect. But when things feel unstable economically, culturally, politically, people retreat to more concrete forms of trust. They trust their group, their side, their narrative, and anything outside of that starts to feel suspect. A neutral figure, by definition, doesn't belong fully to any group, which means in a low-trusted environment, they don't have a natural base of support, they're exposed. So when pressure comes from one side or the other, they don't have a built-in defense, and that's exactly what we've been seeing. Figures who try to operate within the system, according to rules, increasingly find themselves attacked from all directions, not because they've suddenly become more biased, but because the environment around them has changed. The ground they were standing on, the shared belief in the legitimacy of the system, has shifted. So where does that leave us? It means that modern democracies are entering a phase where one of their key stabilizing mechanisms is under stress. The idea that you can have people who are not directly accountable to voters, but still trusted to act fairly, is becoming harder to sustain. And without that layer, everything becomes more directly political, investigations become political, law enforcement becomes political. Even basic administrative decisions start to be interpreted through a political lens. That doesn't necessarily mean democracy collapses, but it does mean it becomes more volatile, more reactive, more driven by short-term dynamics rather than long-term stability. And it makes moments of crisis more dangerous. Because in a crisis, you often need exactly the kind of figures that the system is now struggling to support: people who can step in, apply rules, and be broadly accepted as legitimate. If those people are no longer trusted, then every decision becomes another battleground. So when you look back at someone like Robert Mueller, the most interesting question isn't whether he was right or wrong in any particular decision. It's what his trajectory, and even the reaction to his death, tells us about the system itself. A system that once relied on figures like him to hold the line, and now seems increasingly unsure what to do with them. That's the real story, and it's still unfolding. Thanks for watching.